I stood at the threshold of the bathroom, my hand clamped over my mouth, fighting back the physical urge to retch. There, on the floor, sat a pile of used, soiled toilet paper, stacked like some sort of twisted monument to human laziness. My cousin, a 39-year-old man with a wife, a toddler, and a supposedly successful business, had simply decided that the trash can was too full to deal with. So, instead of taking 30 seconds to empty it, he just stopped. He began piling filth on the floor right next to it. This was the man I was supposed to look up to. This was the man paying my salary for the summer. And in that moment, staring at the literal waste of a grown adult, I realized that this summer wasn't a job opportunity. It was a descent into a psychological nightmare. How does a man with every advantage in life, a father, someone who runs his own company, lose every shred of basic human dignity? And more importantly, what happens when you are the only person brave enough, or maybe just stupid enough, to finally tell him that he's a monster? Let me take you back to the beginning, before the smell of rot and the screaming matches became my daily reality. I'm 16 years old. My brother is 19. Like most guys our age, we were looking for a way to make some decent money over the summer break. We wanted that feeling of independence, that first real paycheck that didn't come from mowing the neighbor's lawn. So, when our cousin, let's call him Mark, reached out with an offer, it felt like a win-win. Mark lives about 3 hours away from our hometown. He runs a business selling souvenirs, those little knickknacks and trinkets you see in tourist shops. It's a busy operation, especially during the summer months. The deal seemed almost too good to be true. He told us, "Look, come stay with me for the summer. I'll provide the housing, I'll handle the food, and you guys just work for the business. You'll get paid, you'll learn the ropes of running a company, and you'll get to spend time with family." My brother and I were a bit reluctant at first. We knew Mark could be a bit much. He was the only child of our Aunt Sarah, and to say he was the center of her universe would be an understatement. But we figured, how bad could it be? It's just a few months. We'd be living in a nice house with his wife and their 2-year-old son. We thought it would be a professional, structured environment. We couldn't have been more wrong. The red flags didn't just pop up. They practically slapped us in the face the moment we moved in. It started with the atmosphere of the house. Mark's wife and son were actually away for a portion of the time we arrived, which left Mark under the care of his mother, Aunt Sarah. Now you have to understand the dynamic here. Mark is 39. He is a middle-aged man. But the second he is within a 10-mile radius of his mother, he regresses into a helpless, entitled infant. Aunt Sarah was there every single day. She wasn't just visiting, she was his servant. She did his laundry, she cooked every meal, and she cleaned up after him as if he was still in diapers. And Mark, he didn't just accept it, he demanded it. He would sit on the couch, barking orders, or just leaving a trail of destruction behind him, knowing full well that Mommy would be there to scrub away the evidence. At first, I tried to stay in my lane. I told myself, it's not my house, it's not my business. But then, the workload started to shift. Aunt Sarah couldn't keep up with everything, and Mark didn't believe in the concept of doing it yourself. The first real check-in with reality happened about a week into the job. I was exhausted after a long day at the warehouse trying to organize the endless crates of souvenirs that Mark kept ordering without any plan for where to put them. I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water, and the sight stopped me cold. The sink wasn't just full, it was overflowing. Crusty plates, bowls with dried cereal, glasses with suspicious films growing at the bottom. And the kicker? The dishwasher was literally right next to the sink. It was empty. All he had to do was bend over, open the door, and slide the plates in. I decided to run a little social experiment. I wanted to see if Mark had even a spark of self-awareness. I told my brother, "Don't touch the dishes. Let's see how long it takes for him to realize he's a 39-year-old man who can operate a machine." One day passed. The pile grew. The smell started to shift from old food to something died in the pipes. 2 days passed. Flies started circling. Mark would walk into the kitchen, look at the mountain of filth, sigh heavily as if he were the victim of some great injustice, and then just leave his new dirty plate right on top of the pile. By the third day, the sink was a biological hazard. It was unsanitary. It was disgusting. And that's when it hit me. He wasn't waiting for a convenient time to do them. He was waiting for me to do them. Or his mother, or his wife when she got back. He viewed basic household chores as beneath him, like they were tasks meant for their help. I remember him coming up to me that evening, smelling like expensive cologne and sweat, and asking me, casually, as if he were asking about the weather, if I could do a load of laundry for him. "I'm out of clean underwear," he said, not even looking me in the eye as he scrolled through his phone. I just stared at him. "The washing machine is in the hallway, Mark. It takes 2 seconds to start." He looked up then, a flicker of genuine confusion on his face. "Yeah, but I don't really know how that one works. It's complicated. Plus, you're already down there, right? Just toss my stuff in." That was the moment the spoiled only child narrative transitioned into something much more sinister. He wasn't just lazy. He was weaponizing his supposed incompetence to enslave the people around him. And because I was 16 and staying in his house, he figured I was the easiest target. But the kitchen and the laundry were nothing compared to what I found in the bathroom. That was the day the mask truly fell off. I went in there expecting a normal bathroom experience and was greeted by the monument I mentioned earlier. He had filled the small trash can next to the toilet with used tissue. When it reached capacity, he didn't empty it. He just started dropping the used paper filled with, well, you can imagine, onto the floor. And inside the toilet, he hadn't even bothered to flush. It was a surprise left for the next person to deal with. I stood there in the silence of that house, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound, and I felt a wave of pure, unadulterated rage. This was the man who talked down to his employees. This was the man who bragged about his business acumen. This was the man who, behind everyone's back, including mine, would whisper and talk crap about how people just don't want to work anymore. I realized then that if I didn't say something, I was going to lose my mind. But how do you confront someone who has spent 39 years being told he's a golden prince who can do no wrong? How do you tell your boss, your cousin, and your host that he's living like a pig and expecting you to be the farmer? I went to find my brother, who was just as disgusted but much more inclined to keep his head down and just get through the summer. But I couldn't do that. I could feel the words bubbling up in my throat, a cocktail of teenage rebellion and basic common sense that was about to explode. I didn't know it yet, but the conversation I was about to have would change everything. Not just for our working relationship, but for the entire family dynamic. If the house was a biohazard, the business was a logistical disaster. It was one thing to deal with Mark's personal filth in the evenings, but during the day, I was expected to respect him as a boss. That was becoming impossible. The souvenir business should have been a well-oiled machine, but instead, it felt like a sinking ship where the captain was busy polishing the deck chairs while the hull was actively being ripped open. Mark had no idea what he was doing. He'd sit in his air-conditioned office scrolling through wholesale websites and just click buy on whatever shiny trinket caught his eye. He ordered thousands of keychains, snow globes, and t-shirts without ever checking our current inventory. The warehouse was already bursting at the seams. There were crates stacked so high they felt like they were leaning toward the center of the room, ready to crush anyone walking by. I'd try to tell him, "Mark, we don't have room for another 50 boxes of plastic dolphins. The aisles are already blocked." He'd just wave me off with a flick of his wrist. "You don't understand the market, kid. These are going to be huge this season. Just find a spot for them. That's what I'm paying you for, isn't it? To figure it out?" The arrogance was staggering. He wasn't paying me to solve his poor planning. He was paying me to be a human Tetris piece in a game he was losing. And while he sat there playing business mogul, my brother and I were breaking our backs in 90-degree heat, trying to shove more junk into a space that physically couldn't hold it. But the physical labor wasn't even the worst part. It was the whispering. Mark had this toxic habit of talking behind everyone's back. I'd be in the back of the warehouse, tucked behind a wall of boxes, and I'd hear him on the phone or talking to another employee. He'd be ripping into people, questioning their work ethic, making fun of their personal lives, or complaining about how lazy the younger generation is. One afternoon, I heard him talking about me. "Yeah, he's here for the summer," Mark said, his voice dripping with that condescending tone I'd come to loathe. But honestly, I'm doing him a favor. He's got no real-world skills. He's slow, and he complains about everything. My aunt, his mom, practically begged me to take him in so he wouldn't just sit around all summer. He's lucky I'm providing him with a roof over his head. Otherwise, he'd be nowhere. I stood there, frozen, holding a box of ceramic monks. My heart was pounding against my ribs. Doing me a favor? I was the one cleaning his house. I was the one keeping his warehouse from becoming a total fire hazard while he sat in his office and played with his phone. The roof over my head was currently leaking, figuratively and literally, and I was paying for it with my sanity. I decided then and there to confront him. I walked right into his office, the adrenaline masking my nerves. "Mark, I heard what you said," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He didn't even look up from his screen. "Heard what? I say a lot of things. I'm a busy man." "You were talking about me, about how I'm lucky to be here and how I have no skills. If you have a problem with my work, tell it to my face. Don't go behind my back to talk trash." He finally looked up, but there was no apology in his eyes. There was just this blank, cold stare. He didn't say a word. He didn't deny it. He didn't justify it. And he certainly didn't care that he'd hurt me. He just waited for me to finish, then looked back down at his computer. It was like I wasn't even there. It was the ultimate power move. The total refusal to acknowledge someone as a human being with feelings. I walked out of that office shaking. I needed to talk to someone who could actually talk some sense into him. My first thought was our uncle, Mark's dad. He was a reasonable man, or so I thought. He'd seen Mark grow up. Surely he knew how out of hand this was getting. I caught my uncle later that week when he stopped by the warehouse. I pulled him aside and laid it all out. I told him about the dishes, the laundry, the unsanitary mess in the bathroom, and the way Mark was running the business into the ground while treating us like garbage. My uncle just sighed, a long, weary sound that made him look 20 years older. He looked at the floor and shook his head. "Look," he said quietly. "I know, I see it too. But if I talk to him, he's just going to get defensive. He'll start an argument and then he won't talk to me for weeks. He gets like this when he doesn't get his way. It's easier to just let him be." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Easier for who? It's not easier for me. It's not easier for his wife. You're his father. If you can't tell him he's acting like a spoiled brat, who can? "He's 39 years old," my uncle replied, almost apologetically. At a certain point, you just realize some people aren't going to change. We just have to manage around him. That was the theme of Mark's entire life: management. Everyone in his circle was busy managing his moods, managing his messes, and managing his ego so that he never had to experience a moment of discomfort. And the architect of this entire system was Aunt Sarah. She was there the next day, fluttering around the house while Mark sat in the living room. It was a hot day and she was worried about him. "Mark, honey, are you drinking enough water?" she asked, her voice filled with that overly sweet motherly concern. "It's so hot out. You need to stay hydrated." It was a simple, harmless question. But for Mark, it was an attack on his autonomy. "I'm fine, Mom. Stop nagging me," he barked, his face turning a dark shade of red. "I'm just worried about you, dear. You look a little flushed." "I said I'm fine," he screamed, standing up so abruptly he nearly knocked over the coffee table. "Why can't you just leave me alone? You're always on my back about something. I don't need you telling me how to drink water." He let out a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush, directed right at his mother, the woman who spent her days scrubbing his floors and washing his underwear. Then he stormed out of the room and slammed the front door so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. Aunt Sarah just stood there, blinking back tears. She didn't get angry. She didn't call him out on his disrespect. She just sighed and started picking up the magazines he'd scattered on the floor. "He's just stressed," she whispered, mostly to herself. "The business is a lot of pressure." I was watching from the hallway and I felt a physical sickness in my stomach. This wasn't stress. This was a man-child throwing a tantrum because someone had the audacity to care about him. And she was going to keep taking it. She was going to keep enabling him until the day she died. That was the final straw for me. The dishes, the bathroom, the backstabbing, the warehouse chaos, it all converged into a single sharp point of clarity. I wasn't going to manage around him anymore. I wasn't going to be another cog in the machine that kept Mark's ego inflated. I decided that the next time I saw him, I was going to lay it all on the table. I didn't care if he fired me. I didn't care if he kicked me out. I was 16. I was tired. And I was done being the only adult in a house full of people twice my age. I waited for him to come back. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at that empty dishwasher, waiting for the sound of his car in the driveway. I knew this wasn't going to be a civilized discussion. Mark didn't do civilized. He did my way or the highway. But what he didn't realize was that I was already halfway to the exit, and I was taking the truth with me. When the door finally opened and he walked back in, looking smug, as if he hadn't just screamed at his own mother, I stood up. "Mark," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "we need to talk right now." Mark walked into the kitchen, tossing his keys onto the counter with a metallic clatter that seemed to echo through the entire house. He didn't even look at me. He just headed straight for the fridge, pulled out a soda, and cracked it open, his eyes fixed on some invisible point on the wall. He was still radiating that toxic energy from his blow-up with his mother, but he carried it with a strange sort of pride, like a king who had just successfully defended his territory from a peasant. I stood there by the table, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought he might actually hear it. My palms were sweaty and my throat felt tight. I was 16 and he was nearly 40. In the hierarchy of the family, I was at the bottom, and he was the successful businessman everyone looked up to. But as I looked at him, all I saw was a man-child who couldn't even manage to put a plate in a dishwasher. "Mark," I said, and my voice came out a little more cracked than I wanted. I cleared my throat and tried again, deeper this time. "Mark, we need to talk about what's going on in this house." He took a slow, deliberate sip of his soda, then finally turned his head to look at me. His expression was one of mild annoyance, the kind you'd give a fly that wouldn't stop buzzing around your head. "What now?" he asked, his voice dripping with boredom. "Is this about the warehouse again? Because I told you, just find the spot for the boxes." "No," I said, stepping forward. "It's not just the warehouse. It's here. It's the way you're living. It's the dishes that have been sitting in that sink for 3 days. It's the laundry you're asking me to do. And it's the mess you left in the bathroom." I couldn't even bring myself to describe the bathroom mess out loud. The mere memory of it made my stomach flip. Mark didn't flinch. He didn't look embarrassed. In fact, he looked almost amused. He leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest. "And? What's your point, kid? You're staying here for free, aren't you? You're eating my food, using my electricity. If I ask you to help out with a few chores, that's just the price of admission." "Helping out is one thing," I countered, my voice rising as the frustration took over. "Being your personal servant is another. You're 39 years old, Mark. The dishwasher is right there. It takes 30 seconds to load it, but you won't do it. You let it rot until the whole house smells like a landfill just because you think you're too good to touch a dirty plate." I saw a flicker of something in his eyes then. Not shame, but a sharp, defensive spark of anger. "Watch your tone," he warned, his voice dropping an octave. "You're a guest in my house." "I'm an employee who's also your cousin," I said, refusing to back down. "And I'm telling you, this is insane. Do you even know how to use the dishwasher? Because if you don't, I'll show you. Seriously, I'll walk you through it right now. I'll show you how to use the washing machine too. It's not a mystery, it's basic life skills." The silence that followed was heavy. I had just offered to teach a grown man how to do his own dishes, and I knew it was a direct hit to his ego. Mark laughed, but it was a cold, dry sound. "I don't need to know how to use them," he said, and the entitlement in his voice was so pure it was almost staggering. "I have people for that. My mom does it, and when my wife gets back, she'll do it. That's how it works. I'm the one out there making the money, running the business, providing for everyone. I don't have time to worry about soap and water." "You have time to sit on the couch and scroll through your phone for 3 hours, I shot back. "You have time to scream at your mother because she asked if you were thirsty. You have time to talk crap about me behind my back at the warehouse. Don't tell me you don't have time. You just don't have the decency." Mark's face went from pale to a deep mottled purple. He stepped closer to me, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You come in here, a 16-year-old kid with nothing, and you think you can tell me how to run my life? My mother loves taking care of me. She's happy to do it. And my wife, she knows her role. If you don't like it, you can pack your bags and go back home. but don't you dare stand in my kitchen and lecture me on decency. At that moment, I realized the depth of the delusion. Mark didn't see himself as a burden. He saw himself as a gift. He genuinely believed that his mother and wife were honored to pick up his literal filth. He had been so spoiled, so coddled by Aunt Sarah his entire life that the concept of reciprocity didn't exist in his brain. To him, other people were just tools to be used until they wore out or until someone else came along to take their place. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel intimidated. I felt sorry for him. I felt sorry for a man who was almost 40 and still needed his mommy to wash his underwear. I felt sorry for a man who couldn't even maintain a basic level of hygiene without someone else holding his hand. "You're right," I said, my voice quiet now, which seemed to catch him off guard. "I am just a kid, but even I know that what you're doing isn't running a business or being a provider. It's being a parasite. You're draining everyone around you, your mom, your wife, your employees, even me and my brother. And the sad part is, you're so used to it that you don't even realize how pathetic it looks from the outside." The word pathetic hit him like a physical blow. He didn't scream this time. He just stood there, his jaw working, his eyes narrowed into slits. The arrogance had been replaced by a cold, simmering resentment. "Get out of my sight," he hissed. I didn't need to be told twice. I walked out of the kitchen, past the overflowing sink and the empty dishwasher, and went straight to the room I shared with my brother. My hands were shaking and my heart was still racing, but for the first time all summer, I felt like I could breathe. I had said it. I had pulled back the curtain and told the king he had no clothes. The aftermath was immediate and suffocating. Mark didn't fire me, probably because he knew he actually needed the labor in that disastrous warehouse. But he became distant. It was a tactical silence. He wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't speak to me. If he needed something done at work, he'd tell my brother to tell me. The atmosphere in the house turned into a frozen wasteland. Aunt Sarah was caught in the middle, looking more stressed than ever. She tried to smooth things over by bringing me extra snacks or checking in on me, but she wouldn't address the elephant in the room. She wouldn't tell Mark he was wrong. She just kept cleaning up after him, her eyes downcast, a silent martyr to the monster she had created. My brother was frustrated too. He agreed with everything I had said, but he was more pragmatic. "We just have a few weeks left," he'd whisper at night. "Just keep your head down. Don't make it worse. We need the money." But I couldn't help but wonder, was the money worth it? Was it worth watching a family member devolve into a caricature of a human being? Was it worth the smell of that bathroom, or the sound of Mark's voice as he belittled the people who loved him most? I started to realize that the confrontation wasn't just about the dishes. It was a wake-up call for me. I was seeing in real time what happens when a person is never told no. I was seeing the end result of a lifetime of enabling. And as I looked at Mark's distant, brooding face across the dinner table, where he still expected a hot meal to be placed in front of him, I knew that I never wanted to end up like that. I'd rather be 16 and unskilled than 39 and utterly helpless. The tension continued to build, a slow burn pressure cooker that was bound to blow again. And the next explosion wasn't going to be about laundry. It was going to be about the business itself. And the house of cards Mark had built was finally starting to wobble. The silence in the house was louder than any of Mark's screaming matches. For the next few days, it was like living with a ghost. If ghosts were incredibly entitled and left a trail of dirty socks and half-eaten sandwiches in their wake. Mark wouldn't look at me, and honestly, that was fine. I didn't want to look at him either. But the tension was a physical weight pressing down on all of us. My brother stayed quiet, his jaw set in a hard line as he worked double time just to avoid being the target of Mark's next outburst. Aunt Sarah, meanwhile, looked like she was mourning something that hadn't even died yet. She hovered around us, her eyes red-rimmed, still picking up Mark's discarded soda cans and smoothing out the wrinkles in his bedsheets. But while the house was a frozen wasteland, the business was a boiling pot of chaos. A few days after our confrontation, a massive semi-truck pulled into the gravel lot of the warehouse. Mark hadn't mentioned a shipment. Usually, we'd get a heads up so we could clear some floor space, but this time, he just stood in the warehouse doorway, his face pale and sweat beading on his forehead, watching the driver jump out of the cab. "Is this the order for the neon glass figurines?" my brother asked, looking at the sheer size of the trailer. Mark didn't answer. He just gestured for us to start unloading. As we broke the seals on the back of that truck, my heart sank. It wasn't just a few boxes. It was pallet after pallet of fragile, cheaply made glass trinkets, thousands of them, and we had nowhere to put them. The warehouse was already a maze of leaning cardboard towers. There were literally no aisles left. "Mark," I said, wiping sweat from my eyes. "Where is this supposed to go? We are always stacked to the ceiling in the back." "Just make it work," he snapped, his voice cracking. He looked frantic, his eyes darting around the cluttered space. "Shove the old stuff aside, stack it higher. I don't care. Just get it inside before the rain starts." My brother and I looked at each other. This was dangerous. The crates were heavy and the stacks were already unstable. One wrong move, one box slightly off center, and the whole thing would come crashing down like a deck of cards. But Mark wasn't listening to logic. He was in a state of pure, unadulterated panic. I started to suspect that the business mogul facade was finally crumbling. He had over-leveraged himself. He was buying more inventory to try and cover the losses of the stuff that wasn't selling. A classic sunk cost fallacy played out in a humid warehouse in the middle of nowhere. He was drowning, and instead of asking for help, he was trying to build a wall of glass figurines to hide behind. For 6 hours, we labored in that stifling heat. My muscles screamed, and my shirt was soaked through. Mark didn't lift a single box. He just paced the perimeter, barking orders and checking his phone every 30 seconds. At one point, one of the stacks shifted. A sickening, grinding sound of cardboard against cardboard. "Whoa, watch out!" my brother yelled, grabbing me by the shoulder and pulling me back, just as a box of Ocean Breezes scented candles tumbled from the top, shattering on the concrete. Mark didn't ask if we were okay. He didn't check to see if we'd been hit. He ran over to the broken box, his face contorted in rage. "Do you have any idea how much those cost?" he screamed at us. "You're so clumsy. You're useless. I'm paying you to be careful, and you're out here destroying my property." The injustice of it was like a physical blow. We were risking our safety to fix his logistical nightmare, and he was blaming us for the laws of gravity? "It fell because you made us stack it too high," I yelled back, my voice echoing off the corrugated metal walls. "This whole place is a hazard, Mark. You're going to get someone killed because you can't admit you don't know how to manage inventory." He looked like he wanted to hit me. For a second, I thought he might actually try. But then his phone rang. He looked at the screen, his expression shifting from rage to a weird, forced mask of composure. "It's my wife," he muttered, turning away from us. "She's almost home." The arrival of Mark's wife, let's call her Claire, and their 2-year-old son was supposed to be a relief. I thought, finally, another adult will be here. Maybe she'll see what's happening and talk some sense into him. I'd only met her a few times, but she seemed like a sensible person. But when the car pulled into the driveway that evening, the vibe didn't get better. It got weirder. Claire walked in, carrying their toddler on her hip, looking exhausted from the 3-hour drive. Mark didn't greet her with a hug or ask how the trip was. He didn't even offer to take the screaming 2-year-old from her arms. He just stood in the hallway and said, "The kitchen's a mess. My mom's been busy, so you need to get on that." I stood in the corner of the living room, absolutely floored. He didn't even say welcome home. He just gave her a chore list. Claire didn't argue. She didn't roll her eyes. She just let out a long, defeated sigh, set the toddler down, and walked straight to the kitchen. I watched her through the doorway as she looked at the sink, which I had finally cleaned myself out of sheer necessity, only for Mark to pile it back up in the last 12 hours. She stood there, staring at the dirty plates, and for a moment, I saw a flash of pure, soul-crushing sadness in her eyes. It was the look of someone who knew exactly what her life was and had simply given up on it ever being different. I realized then that Aunt Sarah hadn't just spoiled Mark. She had trained him to believe that women were tools. He viewed his mother as his servant and his wife as the person who took over the shift when his mother went home. He didn't see Claire as a partner. He saw her as a biological dishwasher. Later that night, I went into the kitchen to get some water. Claire was there, scrubbing a pot. The house was quiet. Mark was finally asleep, and the toddler was down for the night. "Do you want some help?" I asked quietly. She jumped a little, not having heard me come in. She looked at me, pushing a stray hair out of her face with a soapy hand. "Oh, no, it's okay. I've got it. I'm used to it." "You shouldn't have to be," I said. "He's 39. He can do a dish." Claire stopped scrubbing and looked at the water swirling in the sink. "He's an only child," she said, almost as if that explained everything. His mom, she never let him fail. She never let him be uncomfortable. And now, he doesn't know how to handle anything that isn't exactly the way he wants it. "But that's not fair to you," I argued. "Or to his son. What is he learning? That it's okay to treat people like this?" Claire didn't answer. She just went back to scrubbing. It was the most heartbreaking thing I'd seen all summer. She wasn't an enabler out of love like Aunt Sarah. She was an enabler out of exhaustion. It was easier to just do the dishes than to deal with the screaming, the cursing, and the 3-day silent treatments that followed if she dared to ask for help. I went back to my room, but I couldn't sleep. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This was the future. This was what making it looked like in Mark's world. A crumbling business, a warehouse full of broken glass, a mother who lived in fear of her son's moods, and a wife who had lost her spark. And then there was me, 16 years old, trapped in the middle of it. I looked at my brother, who was already asleep. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't stay here until the end of the summer. I couldn't keep collecting a paycheck from a man I despised, in a house that felt like a prison. But I also knew that leaving wasn't going to be easy. Mark wouldn't just let me go. He'd see it as a betrayal. He'd see it as me quitting on the family. But as I lay there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the one Mark never cleaned, the one Claire was currently filling with groceries, I knew that the final confrontation was coming. And this time, it wouldn't be about the laundry or the dishes. It would be about my freedom. The next morning, the warehouse disaster finally hit the breaking point. The rain Mark had been worried about? It came. A summer thunderstorm, the kind that turns the sky green and makes the world feel like it's underwater. And the warehouse roof, the one Mark had been meaning to fix, finally gave up. The sound of the rain on the warehouse roof was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't a pitter-patter. It was a rhythmic, metallic roar that made conversation impossible. The sky outside had turned a bruised, sickly shade of green, and the air was so heavy with moisture you could practically taste it. We were halfway through a shift, my brother and I, moving the last of those glass figurines when the first crack happened. It wasn't a structural snap. It was the sound of a seal giving way. Then came the water. It started as a single steady stream, pouring directly onto a stack of cardboard boxes filled with limited edition coastal snow globes. Within seconds, another leak opened up 10 feet away. Then another, and another. The roof wasn't just leaking, it was dissolving. Mark's meaning to fix it attitude had finally caught up with him, and the sky was pouring into his bank account. "Move them! Get the tarps! Move the pallets!" Mark was screaming, his voice cracking with a high-pitched desperation. He was running in circles, his expensive loafers splashing through the puddles that were already forming on the concrete floor. My brother and I grabbed the heavy industrial tarps, but it was like trying to put a band-aid on a gunshot wound. Every time we covered one stack, two more started getting soaked. Cardboard is a sponge. Once the bottom of a box gets wet, the whole stack becomes unstable. I watched in slow motion as a 6-foot-high pile of souvenir t-shirts began to lean, the damp cardboard at the base buckling under the weight. "Don't just stand there!" Mark shrieked at me, his face twisted in a mask of pure terror. "Save the inventory! That's thousands of dollars! If that gets ruined, it's coming out of your pay." I stopped. I just stopped. I was holding a corner of a heavy, dirty tarp, the rain dripping off the brim of my hat, and I looked at him. Really looked at him. He wasn't helping. He wasn't grabbing a box. He wasn't even directing us with any kind of logic. He was just a terrified child watching his toys get wet, and his first instinct, his only instinct, was to threaten the 16-year-old kid who was currently trying to save his life's work. "It's coming out of my pay?" I shouted back over the roar of the storm. "I'm 16, Mark. I make minimum wage. You haven't fixed this roof in years, and you're blaming me because it's raining? You didn't stack them right," he yelled, his eyes bulging. "If you'd put them where I told you, they'd be dry." That was a lie. A blatant, desperate lie. He had told us to stack them exactly where the water was currently pouring in. My brother saw the look on my face and stepped between us, his hands up. "Mark, calm down. We're doing what we can, but the roof is gone. We need to focus on the high-value electronics in the back." But Mark was beyond logic. He was in the middle of a full-blown meltdown. He started grabbing boxes himself, but he was so frantic he was dropping them. I heard the sickening clink shatter of glass hitting the floor. He was destroying more inventory in his panic than the rain was. "My mom said this was a good year," he moaned, almost to himself now, ignoring the water soaking his expensive shirt. "She said everything would be fine. She said you guys would help me. You're supposed to help me." There it was, the core of his entire existence. she said. His mother had promised him a world where nothing went wrong, and now that reality was crashing through the ceiling. He didn't have the internal tools to handle it. He was 39 years old, and he was waiting for a magic wand to wave the rain away. The storm lasted for 45 minutes. By the time the thunder faded into a dull rumble and the rain slowed to a drizzle, the warehouse was a graveyard. The smell of wet cardboard and stagnant water was overwhelming. Hundreds of boxes were turned to mush. Thousands of dollars in souvenirs were either shattered or ruined by water damage. Mark sat on a plastic crate in the middle of the mess, his head in his hands. He looked small. For the first time, he didn't look like a boss or an older cousin. He looked like a fraud who had finally been found out. "We need to start sorting through the damage," my brother said, his voice weary. "Maybe some of it is salvageable." Mark didn't look up. "Just go home," he muttered. "Both of you, get out. I can't look at you right now." We didn't argue. We walked out of that warehouse, the humid air sticking to our skin, and drove back to the house in total silence. I knew deep down that the summer was over. Not just the job, but the illusion of family we'd been trying to maintain. When we got back to the house, Aunt Sarah was there, of course. She'd heard about the storm and was already in the kitchen, making a giant pot of comfort food, some kind of heavy pasta dish Mark liked. She looked up as we walked in, her face full of concern. "Is he okay? Is my Marky okay?" she asked, her hands fluttering to her chest. "The warehouse is flooded, Aunt Sarah," I said, my voice flat. "The inventory is ruined. And no, he's not okay. He's throwing a tantrum because he didn't fix the roof when he should have." Her face hardened instantly. The sweet aunt mask slipped, replaced by the fierce, blind loyalty of an enabler. "Don't you talk about him like that. He's under a lot of pressure. He works so hard for this family. And you boys, you're just kids. You don't understand what it's like to have responsibilities." "Responsibilities?" I laughed, and it felt like a release. "Aunt Sarah, I've done more laundry and dishes in the last 2 weeks than Mark has done in the last decade. I've watched him scream at you for wanting him to stay hydrated. I've seen him leave literal filth on the bathroom floor because he's too lazy to empty a trash can. That's not responsibility. That's a sickness, and you're the one feeding it." The slap didn't happen, but it felt like it did. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Aunt Sarah's mouth hung open, her eyes wide with shock. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever pointed out the sickness in the middle of a living room. "Get out," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Pack your things. I won't have you disrespecting my son in his own home." "It's not his home, Sarah," a voice said from the doorway. We all turned. It was Claire. She was standing there, holding her son, who was finally quiet. She looked at Aunt Sarah and then at me. There was a strange, haunting calm in her expression. "It's our home," Claire continued, her voice steady. "And he's right. Everything he said is right. I've been sitting in that bedroom, listening to the way you talk to these boys, and the way Mark treats everyone. I've been waiting for someone to finally say it out loud." Aunt Sarah looked like she'd been struck by lightning. "Claire, how can you say that after everything we've done for you?" "What have you done for me, Sarah?" Claire asked, stepping into the kitchen. "You've helped raise a man who doesn't know how to be a husband or a father. You've helped him stay a child. And I'm the one who has to live with the consequences of that every single night." She looked at me and nodded, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "You should go, guys. Go back home. This isn't a place for you. You're 16 and 19. You have your whole lives ahead of you. Don't let this place soak into your bones. Don't end up like him. I felt a lump in my throat. I looked at my brother and he just nodded. We went to our room and packed our bags in record time. We didn't wait for Mark to come home. We didn't wait for another apology or another paycheck. We just wanted out. As we loaded our bags into the car, I looked back at the house. I saw Claire standing in the window watching us. I saw Aunt Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, probably already thinking of how she was going to fix this for Mark when he got back. But as I pulled out of the driveway and started the 3-hour drive back to my real life, I realized something. You can fix a roof. You can dry out a warehouse. But you can't fix someone who doesn't think they're broken. And you certainly can't save someone who spent their whole life being told that the world exists solely to serve them. My cousin was 39, and in a way, his life was already over. He was trapped in a cycle of his own making, surrounded by people he'd pushed away or turned into servants. And as the miles put distance between me and that house, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. I'm 16 years old. I don't have a lot of real-world skills yet, but I know how to do my own laundry. I know how to load a dishwasher. And most importantly, I know that when the rain starts pouring through the roof, the only person who can save you is the one you see in the mirror. So I have to ask you, have you ever been in a situation where you were the only one willing to speak the truth, even if it meant losing everything? Would you have stayed to finish the summer for the money, or would you have walked away like I did? Let me know in the comments. And if you've ever dealt with a spoiled family member who made your life a living nightmare, share your story. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself when the world tries to keep you quiet.